Hi everyone, just meeting back again with you for this week's element, which is going to be about typography. So I want to give you a brief introduction about type and typography, and I want to reemphasize intro because typography in general is really a lifelong pursuit, and it's an extremely important element that you'll be working with as a designer. So this is just an introduction to go along with your type class, which I'm sure is going into this much more in depth than what I'll be just touching on here. But I'm going to just briefly kind of go through a little bit about what your chapter 7 says, because that's what you're going to be reading this week. And then I'll also talk about your assignment. So type, it's a design element. Yes, an extremely important one. So of course, there's influential periods, movements, typographers, artists who have influenced us in what we do today and what designers do and how they create and how they design with type. So we might talk talk a little bit about some historical periods, and I'll just throw a couple names out there for you. But this is also something you should be researching in your type class and also on your own as you continue to be a designer. And also we'll look at some art and some works in design that also I think is really strong in type. And your assignment is really about the creative use, just starting to experiment with type, thinking like type is actually still shape. And we just moved from working with shapes last week. So I want you to continue in that mindset that, type is shape. And you're going to be just looking at the nuances of letters, characters, and finding good compositions within them. And it's a great way to start knowing how to look at type by experimenting with type. Okay, so let's move on to the next page here. Typography, it has a voice. You've probably heard this already. Of course, fonts have voices. The way that would be just, characters in general have voices. If you look at this, of course, impact is going to be a lot bolder and heavier and not really appropriate for whisper as much as something like Avenir Ultralight. So fonts in general, they they definitely have voices. They connotate message just purely how they're built or how their shapes of their characters are built. Even impact here, it's not just the shape of the letters, it's also how tight they are together and they're a little bit condensed. Um, they just they look a little bit more uh, you know impactful, really. That's where the name came from, than something that would be looser or more whimsical or, a little lighter, like the ultralight font down here. Typography, though, would that's when we start combining things together. I'm jumping to history here. So that's when we would also include color and texture, pairing with other fonts. That's more when we get into working as a typographer, is when we work with all of those elements together with type. So some historical references. Trajan's column. Look how old that is. 114 CE. Trajan Pro today, if you go on Adobe Fonts, you would see Trajan Pro is very available. It's absolutely beautiful. It comes in only all caps. Um, you can see it was definitely based off of the original column that a mason obviously used, probably a tool to literally chisel in those serifs. See those right there? The serifs only go down, they don't go up as well. So it's definitely based off of that original beautiful example that's in a column in Roman. I think it's in Italy. Yeah, it is in Rome. I have not seen that. I've been to Rome, but I don't believe I've seen that in person. But this is historical references. That's how this was built. It was derived from this example. And I also put a link here. I'll put these notes up so that you can see some information about this. This actually comes from a timeline that's online about typography that you might want to visit, because it's going to talk about maybe, you know, Egyptian hieroglyphics all the way to Gutenberg's Bible, and then all the way to Herb Lubelin's, mother and child uh, magazine examples. So, I mean, there's going to be some really good examples in there that you might want to look at, and it might be useful also in your type class as well. But like I said, I will put these notes up so you'll have these links just for reference. Here's that Gutenberg Bible page that I was just telling you in that timeline. So this is the first set book. It's very famous. So if you're ever playing like trivia and someone asks you a question about Gutenberg, you might be able to say, well, in 1454, he created the first book using lead type, that it was set by hand. It wasn't scribed by hand by the monks in Italy, and that goes back even further, a little bit more history that you probably don't want to hear about. But before this, many of the books were written by hand. So you can imagine how long that took. Lead type, that's how they did this. These are a little bit more modern looking lead type. These are some of my examples from my office. I collect them. People still use them. It's becoming kind of an art form to do letterpress, and people are setting type with even wood letters. If you want to go further into that, there's a company in Nashville called Hatch, Hatch, and they do music posters and have been doing them for decades. Anyway, those are done with these big wood carved letters, and it's kind of the same process, but that's a good website for you to visit if you want to see that done in more of a modern technique. And they have some really great examples on that website as well. Also, so how did they house all these letters? This could be completely ridiculous if you've got the serif Y and then the sans serif P. You want to keep them separate. They used to organize them by font, and they also had the uppercase in a box, and then of course the lowercase in a box. And just so that another trivia question, if you're ever asked where uppercase and lowercase came from, the uppercase boxes were always above the lowercase. So that was kind of how they were termed uppercase and lowercase. So this is just something I wanted to show on how quickly we started to evolve from this really condensed, and it's kind of called like a black letter. That's a classification that you're learning about probably in typography. It's very condensed, kind of hard to read, kind of heavy over here in the Gutenberg Bible page. And then you come over here, and Jensen started, and this was just soon after, from 1454. I forgot missing a parenthesis there, to 1470. Look at how it's becoming more like what we read today. I know it's in a different language, but still, the letter forms are more open. There's more, they're a little wider. It's more of a calligraphy or almost handwritten look to it. And he started carving lead type into those fonts. Jensen did. So I still want to talk about a little bit about how much things still look the same. Okay, so there's been a little bit of work done. This isn't the Adobe Jensen font, and you can find this on adobefonts.com. I'll go there in a minute and show you where those are. But this was 500. This font was really built 500 years ago. Here's the original. I know it looks a little harder to read here and heavier because it's been reproduced so many times. But clearly this font, if I can find something like an S, which I'm not sure I'll find, but this font from Adobe Jensen, Adobe Fonts, was built from this. The original design was created in 1470. Here it is on Adobe Fonts. If you haven't been on Adobe Fonts yet, I would highly recommend going on there and activating and researching and maybe finding some good fonts to download, especially for this exercise. If you don't have Adobe yet, some of you might not be an Illustrator. You might not have purchased the Creative Cloud. If that's the case, you can still find a lot of variety of fonts in your Microsoft and Google Docs, things like that. You could probably find enough of a variation to still do this exercise just fine. Oops, I keep forgetting I'm in Acrobat. Here it is. Oh, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. So you'll see this a lot when you are looking for fonts, and that is because it's a pangram, which means every single character, all 26 characters of the alphabet, are used in this one line of copy. That's what that means. So that's why you see that sentence when you're looking for fonts, just to let you know what that is, because it's like a funny sentence. It's like, who would ever say this, and where did it come from? That's where it comes from. So your book also talks about the classifications of type, and I was already talking about that. I talked a little bit about Gutenberg's black letter look for his font. So definitely read about those in your book, and it talks about quite a few of them. I also wanted to throw this link in here. Ellen Lupton's thinkingwithtype.com gives you an extremely good reference for these different classifications. And like I said, I will still put this up on Blackboard so you can get to it and kind of see what those are, right there on the web if you don't have your book handy with you. Here's just a brief, just so you can see 4 of the classifications up front and see how different they really are. Old style, I don't have transitional up here, but old style, you can see it was much closer to that Adobe Jensen. You can see the axis is usually the same. There's repeat angles. See the repeat angles on the D and the L for those serifs. Modern is usually much more high contrast, thick and thin lines over here. Extremely thick, extremely thin. Sometimes the serifs are just extremely flat. They don't have any no curvature going into the serifs. Slab serif is exactly what it says it is. It's a big old slab serif. It's like you almost put a rectangle on the end of that letter to make a serif. Oops, and sans serif, of course, means no serif, right? So I also put, and you'll see these notes, there's quite a few options for you to look at when you're looking for fonts that you might want to take a look at. Some of these, if you're particularly interested in a certain classification or group of font. And of course, there's many more than what I just put here. So in your book on page 184, I think this is a great list to start with. I'm going to just move this over here. Just kind of look at some of these and start looking at the different shapes that they're built with, the spacing, how thick they are, how thin they are, how short they are, how tall they are, all of those things. This is a great list to start just knowing. The more you know about fonts, the easier it is for you later to start pairing them or using them to connotate a certain message. Those things are really important. Some other ones that I'd like to see you memorize, or designers in general memorize first too. I would add these to the list from your book. Garamond, Baskerville, Century School Book, Helvetica, Optima, Rockwell. For example, look at Helvetica and Optima. 2 sans serifs, these 2 top ones here. Extremely different though. If you look at Optima, you could even see the Estee Lauder logo for any of you that might know about makeup. It's much more feminine. It's humanist. It's a humanist typeface. And then you have this one, Helvetica, which is, they call it grotesque. I don't know why. It's more geometric. It's much more sanitary. You could see roadway signs, exit signs built in this. So sans serifs, even if they are in the same category as a sans serif, there's going to be many more options, and they can take on very different meanings. Here's another sans serif, Bauhaus. You can see the beautiful font, very different from the last two I showed you. And of course, Futura, geometric, extremely geometric, very round O's. Um, Definitely a good one to know. I would even throw Gill Sans in there too. I would think you should know that one too. Put that right after Futura. Okay, in the anatomy of type, your book goes into that a bit as well. Literally, anatomy of type should be almost be a whole week's worth of lesson, but and you'll be doing that in your typography class. But another great, here's Ellen Lupton's site again. I want you to visit that if you need help discerning what these are and memorizing the parts of the characters are. Great resource. So typeface families. Let's see. Let me move this over. Actually, that list is not in your book. I got it from a different book. This is Brioso. Look at all these different options that you have. Light caption italic, light text, text italic, subhead italic, display, poster, caption, all these things. So there's a variety. That's a type family. It's a Brioso family. That's what that means. In one family, you can have a variety of options. Sometimes a very safe way of working, if you have, would be to use the variations inside one family. If I wanted to pair two with enough contrast but enough similarity to look like they belong together, it could be a good option to maybe choose Pro Light and Poster Italic in the same family, depending on what I want to do. A font is inside of the family. So the font, it means typeface in electronic terminology, but really what it is, it's all the characters of a specific font size. So if I said Helvetica Bold size 12, that's one font. If I said Helvetica size 12, Helvetica regular 12 point, that would be another font. And think of it back to where when they were carving and actually creating these lead fonts that they would set by hand. So every case, every box had a different size in it. In other words, every single one of them was a different font, but they would keep them in the families. You know, all the Helveticas would be in the same stack or somewhere near each other. But the font is literally the individual font at a specific size. This comes from your book, page 182. I think it's a good example. A particular typeface can extend the perception of a word and its meaning. Of course, this is what we were talking about with the different fonts have different meanings, different voices. Even all caps here is a different way of looking at something as well, which I think is a good option to, always think about. But typography is when you start to combine them together to create the word. Type can also create identity. Think of logos, Nike, budget car rental, all those things. This pretty much treating the type like a shape so that nobody else can just type this out, buy the Amazon font and type out Amazon and use it wherever they freely want to. When we create logos, type is an essential piece of the information, but bulletproofing something just a bit by curving this and adding the graphic. It's a great way of creating identity. It's not, no one else can just easily, you could reproduce this, of course, but it's not like you could just type it out. I also want you to think that type is shape. It is shape, and this is where we're going with this exercise. Type is still shape. It's a compositional tool, and I want you to think of it that way. So all of those things I just talked about, like historical references and the anatomy and the classifications, don't go too deep in that this week. That's really for your type class. I want you to think of type as shape and what you can create from it and have some fun with it compositionally. This is a book cover, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. You can even use characters to build characters. Not near this exercise, but this is just a good example of type being shape, type being more than type. And you can read all about that. It really is just about experiment with type. Try new things. Herb Lubalin, right here, very influential name. You should know that. If not, go ahead and read more about him. So here I wanted to talk about this over here, the sans serif geometric, these shapes, and how dynamic this composition is. The spacing between the letters, how he did this, the angles, absolutely beautiful. But there are things in type that repeat. If you just imagine the alphabet, even over here with this word mother here, the thickness of the strokes and the arms and all of those things, parts of the character repeat. The size of the serifs, the curves. Many of the angles will end up being the same, or radiuses. If I had a B here, it would probably mimic this bowl that's in the R. Repetition is huge in fonts. And there's a lot that you can do when you start combining those letters. Also, don't forget about counter space or the inside space or the negative space. You know, even putting a logo or something inside of a letter is really cool. Let me move myself over here. Neil Stevens, another influential designer, really an illustrator. However, he tends to use a lot of characters and letters in his work. You should follow him or take a look at him on Behance. Just incredible use of limited color and just character and shape. Just beautiful stuff here. Great use of typography too to go along with his posters. All right, so your first type, it's not your first type assignment. If you're in typography, you've already been doing type assignments. But for me, you will be doing a type assignment, and you'll start by just studying a character. Pick a character that's really interesting to you. It could be any character that you want from the 25 characters. Probably stay away from exclamation points and punctuation, even ampersands or glyphs. I would stay away from those. I really literally want it to be you studying a letter and looking at different fonts of the same letter. Don't forget about uppercase and lowercase. So what you'll first be doing, of course, read the assignment, but you're going to be making a type study of a bunch of letters. And then you'll choose, you'll do a bunch of thumbnails, finding interesting compositions from them. And then you'll move on to creating your assignment. So I think that was all I had for this. I'm going to jump over into Illustrator. So here's that type study with the R's. Now, you might need, if you don't have Illustrator, you might need to use a Xerox machine and really blow these things up a little bit larger so that you can really kind of get a feel for compositions. Right now I'm zoomed way in. If I, I'm going to put my tools over here so you can see what I'm doing. If I zoom out, so you can see the type study here. But if I zoom in, there's your zoom tool right here. I'm just going to kind of zoom in, and I can make a rectangle here. And in your directions, it says to make a viewfinder, which you can do. You could get a piece of paper and just cut, make sure it's a real square. If you do it, use your X-Acto. And you're going to want to cut a square in the middle of the paper, and then you could hold it up to your monitor if you wanted to. I would suggest printing out your study sheet of letters at various sizes, quite large, so that you could play around with finding compositions that way. Because even at 48 point, another trivia thing, or actually you might need to know this for typography, there are 72 points in an inch. So even at 48 points, you're not quite at an inch for some of your letters. So you might need to really enlarge them quite a bit more. You could even take your letters and go up to 200 point size if you wanted to, if you were working in the 2 by 2 inch square, which is what it says on your assignment sheet. So like I said, read the assignment sheet. This might make more sense to you. You can just take a rectangle though. Here I am. Here's your rectangle tool. And if I just click one time, so for instance, if I did a 2 by 2, it's going to be too large for the point size that I have, right? Because I really want you to find a composition using one character. So I would, right now, what I'm going to do my thumbnails, and I'm holding shift because I want this to remain a square. That's important because your final is going to be cut and trimmed to a 5 by 5 inch square. Don't forget to trim them and line them up when you take a picture of them. For me, that makes a difference. So if I'm looking for interesting compositions, this R is kind of cool, isn't it? You know, maybe I'm going to go over here. So this is still kind of hard to see for me. One other thing I might add, if you have your control panel up, it'll be at the top of your screen, and you can't see it because I can see that I'm cut off there. So I'm going to actually do it this way. I'm going to select my square, and up at the top, if you go to Window, and then go down to Stroke, and if you don't see what I see, if it looks like this, very limited, go ahead and click on the options there, Show Options. It's that little hamburger menu. And I'm going to swap out, I'm just going to make it bigger first so you can see what happens. And that doesn't work because the stroke will go from the inside to the inside of the path to the outside of the path. But if I switch it so that it goes to the outside of the path only, I can have a bit more of a window here, and then I can try to find some interesting compositions. Feel free to even rotate if you want, however you want to find the best composition for you. And then you'll start doing thumbnails. So you can look at it from here in thumbnail, or you could do this and actually print out your study sheet again with areas being cropped out. And that might be easier for you. You could even trace your thumbnails. You could choose the certain one that you wanted and enlarge it on your, even here in Illustrator, up to 5 inches, or you could even put it on the Xerox machine and enlarge it. However, you know, whatever works easiest for you. Maybe I'm going to come over here. So once again, for me, this is hard to see. I like to actually crop all that out and see. Then I can really see what I'm kind of going for. And maybe I need a little larger square here, but I'm just kind of going for dynamic compositions using one character. Okay? All right, all the directions are on the assignment. If you're having trouble, email me, and definitely get your thumbnails up by Wednesday, and that way I can see if you're on the right path. And like I said, go ahead and email me if you're having issues, or if you're not an illustrator at all and you need help with your study sheet so that you have more fonts. Let me know. I can try to help you with that as well. I'm going to jump over here just so you know. Adobe Fonts. So here I am in Adobe Fonts. If you have the Adobe Creative Cloud, you can definitely go into that. I'm in it all the time. I'm going to try to show you how it looks. If you click on your Creative Cloud, this is what you see. You click the F for fonts to go into it, and that would take you into this. And then you can start searching, you know, and have some fun with it. See what you can find. All right. Good luck this week, and I know you'll do great. And like I said, just email me if you have any questions. And I can't get back over here. There we go. Let me, once again, have a good week.